So let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. I'm Cassie Clark, and I use she, her pronouns. I am the Community Engagement Coordinator here at Oregon Housing and Community Services. And we are here this afternoon to discuss the Affordable Rental Housing Division's agency request budget. Thank you so much for being here today. If you wouldn't mind, let us know who's joining us today by dropping your name and organization in the chat. Please also rename your Zoom box to include your name and organization. We just really want to know who we're engaging with today. Next slide. So for our discussion today, we're going to have Director Bell walk us through the budget overview process, and then next we'll have Natasha Detweiler-Davy. She'll review what we mean when we're talking about preservation and permanent supportive housing and the questions we want to pose to you for that feedback. We will then spend quite a bit of time in two breakout rooms because we really do want to hear from you. The first breakout room will be for preservation, and that will be facilitated by Natasha. And the second room is for permanent supportive housing, and that will be facilitated by Rick Rizuka. We will then come back together at around 2:15, and Rick and Natasha will summarize the breakout room conversations, and then we'll wrap up with our next steps. Again, our goal here today really is to hear from you, so I hope we do. Next slide. Before we get started, I just want to ground us in our meeting agreements that we use internally here at OHCS, and we ask that you practice these agreements with us today in our breakout sessions. So we hope that you will help us foster an inclusive environment, stay engaged with the conversation, and please speak your truth responsibly. We hope you listen to understand and be willing to do things differently, experience discomfort, and this, which I know you've seen before, expect and accept non-closure. As I said, this really is for listening today. So we look forward to that feedback, and then we'll have some next steps. So next slide, please. And finally, we have some housekeeping items. We are recording the session and posting it to our website. We'll also using Easy Retro boards. And so we're going to drop in the chat those links. You can add your feedback to these boards, or you can come off mute in your breakout sessions. We do have note takers assigned to each of these rooms to capture that feedback. So you can do it either way. Next slide. And now I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Director Bell.
Wonderful. Thanks, Cassie. Afternoon, everybody. It's really good to be in virtual community with you on a Friday afternoon. I know days are commitment filled, and so the fact that you chose to prioritize a little bit of time with us today means so much, and so we're certainly appreciative of it. Andrea Bell, Executive Director here at Oregon Housing and Community Services. I use she, her pronouns. First off, let me just say we are in OHCS is in a season where we are beginning to build our 2025-27 budget. Now, whether you have worked alongside us in the past in previous budget builds, or this is your first time engaging in and working with us alongside the budget build, first of all, thank you. And I think with all of our past budget processes, I think we have always found a critical part of the budget build process to ensure that we are creating space to candidly listen and engage with our partners across the work that are facilitating progress across the state. We have always seen these opportunities to work alongside all of you, whether it's in this large group setting or on a one-on-one smaller basis, have been very valuable thought partners to us. And doing the work locally that have and bring a perspective candidly that we may not see at the state. And so we expect that this process will continue to really be a place to illuminate the expertise that each of you that you have that are reflective of our shared values and service to the people of Oregon. And I think under their shared values, this budget build is one of a continuous and relentless pursuit to ensure that we are together, not just as the state, but collectively continuing to deliver measurable and transparent outcomes in a way that make everyday life a little bit easier from a housing perspective for the people that we serve. And candidly, much like I'm sure from your respective seat, the progress that we are in pursuit of is also essential that we are doing so in a way that it is progress that everybody can be a part of that progress, and to ensure that in that we are reflective of certain geographical needs, but also recognizing that this is incumbent upon us to ensure that we are understanding the needs of the vast varieties of communities that we serve in that. Now, ultimately, the ultimate measure of our past progress and any future progress is really how well people are doing across the state in Oregon communities. And so that posture of partnership, that posture of listening is one of both criticality and certainly a moral imperative from us. And so as we are really beginning to build and co-create this budget with you, my hope is that those group agreements that were laid out that may be new for some of you are ones that you will hold us to, not only in this conversation, but as we continue through this budget build process. We have a lot of things to cover today, so I will just wrap it up and just acknowledge that this is part of ongoing conversations as we're going to focus on some very specific supply side programs. I think each of you know, your teams know that there is a lot of folks across the state of Oregon that go to sleep every night and wake up every single morning stressed out, worried, and concerned about housing. And I know that that is something that you all see in your reflective seats. And thus is the reason for us to convene under Common Cause today. So we are working very closely with Governor Kotek's office in developing this budget build process, and the priorities are both a reflection of and in alignment with the governor's priorities, which remain focused. So thank you for making the time today. We look forward to diving into the conversation and more to come. So with that, I will yield and turn it back to the team.
Great. Should I just take it from here, Knesset? Awesome. Okay, thank you, Andrea, and hello, everybody. This is Natasha Detweiler-Daby, Director here of Affordable Rental Housing. I use she, her pronouns. Thanks for joining with us here today. We're queued up a couple really big topics to be talking about with you all today. First up is preservation. I think we can go to the next slide. So underneath a broad umbrella of preservation, I think there's a lot of different types of things. One of the things I want to kind of level set here around what is it that we're talking about around preservation. I think most certainly, as we are acutely interested and concerned about expanding affordable rental housing across the state to be able to address the really significant need. We also know that we need to continue to invest in our existing portfolio and ensure that it can continue to operate. Part of that is when projects are expiring, and I think we have stood up a pretty robust effort around the with the PUSH program to make sure that we are tracking that and forecasting that. So that would be the expiring projects risk of loss. We also know that there is significant risk within our portfolio that is not so directly tied to that date of expiry, but are other physical and financial conditions and impacts to projects, navigating over long tenures of operating, but also in changing markets and operating environments. We also know that over the past 4 years, there has been significant time, effort, energy, and cost to continuing to operate affordable rental housing, and that organizations, many organizations have redirected resources, organizational funds into their projects to sustain operations. So bringing into this conversation that organizational and portfolio risk, which is really around the backbone and infrastructure for holding and moving projects forward, both to sustain current operations, but also to ensure those organizations are able to be a large driver of expanding affordable housing across the state moving forward. And then manufactured housing park preservation, where naturally occurring affordable housing is at risk of loss due to market conversion. And so as we're thinking about going into those conversations, and we can go to the next slide. We've queued up, there's two slides of questions here, but wanting to focus our conversation and seeking input on digging in on some of these questions. I think we're, on associated with expirations, there's a date associated with that. It's complicated, even with a date, and the areas where we know that there are projects with severe, financial challenges, physical condition issues that are coming up. Some of that from a state perspective and at OHCS, we end up seeing through, regular check-ins on financial statements for projects for those that have that requirement with us, others that come up through compliance visits. And otherwise, though, we don't have a broad foundation and basis for being able to give good predictability to the legislature and others about the scale of resources that are needed to meet the need. Instead, we are kind of reaching out ad hoc to understand that environment a bit better, and only seeing the real line for those resources when we have in the past opened up specific NOFAs to address them. So are really wanting to understand and get any insider thoughts on how do we make this feel more predictable, both from us at the state around what resources and programs do we need to set up, but also for you as housing operators about what would be helpful to do that. So thinking about what would incentivize information sharing with the state, with OHCS about your portfolio health, and then what tools would help owners be able to address significant project challenges. So physical, financial challenges, what are those tools? We know that having navigated changing market environments always has impact on projects, and that over the last 4 years, we've had some significant volatility. And so are interested in understanding, as you reflect today on your portfolios, what operational costs are do you see as the greatest challenge in the market today? And then what do we think about for addressing the financial challenges? Where is there a market product that you rely on that or had previously been able to rely on that doesn't exist today? Obviously, seeing that the changes are not only to our operations, but also in the lending market and many others. The next slide. And then we get to this organizational piece, as I was describing and kind of forecasting a minute ago. All of the change and volatility has made us really want to look and understand the organizational impacts underneath this preservation conversation. So trying to better understand what scale of organizational resources have been deployed from your organizations to support portfolio, and in that vein, what type of one-time support would be helpful for us to consider at the state in terms of being a remedy for your organizations and portfolio operational impacts? And as you are navigating all of that element, what are the greatest challenges that owners are facing in sustaining healthy operations for their portfolio? So those are really the overview of the various questions for your insight and expertise underneath the preservation umbrella. And I think then I can go into the next slide to forecast a little bit more around the permanent supportive housing. And can just go to the next slide. Permanent supportive housing. We have launched several years ago our PSH initiative, which has really been focused on serving the most acute need for those with chronic homelessness. We use a strategy that is in alignment with our homelessness system, so doing referrals through coordinated entry, approaching this from a housing first approach, where we are providing stable housing to those that are exiting or referred through coordinated entry, provided rental assistance and on-site supportive services, tenancy supports, and then direct connections to any other case management that is required or is appropriate for the referred tenants. And so we then go to the next slide. And so as we are thinking about this, I think we have intentionally worked to align our PSH initiative with the state funding. In that alignment, looking at local continuum of cares to establish the definition of homelessness, of chronic homelessness rather. So, which probably a large number of you are familiar with, but includes not only the duration and qualities of the home being chronic homeless, but having co-occurring disabilities and acuity needs that make that those populations a fit. And from our programmatic seat, those households must earn 60% AMI or below at initial occupancy. Go to the next slide. So we're looking at the questions for our permanent supportive housing conversation today, wanting to just better understand a whole bunch of things underneath PSH. So understanding first, what are the biggest challenges in operating projects that include permanent supportive housing? I think, there's a lot of these topics that we have talked about. We had last legislative session received resources to stand up a permanent supportive housing risk mitigation fund, which is an intentional investment to try to offset some of those operating challenges and insurance cost increases. But is, wondering, as we are continuing to navigate and expand the amount of permanent supportive housing across the state, wanting to see what other challenges that you are encountering in operating permanent supportive housing. And then on the services side, wanting to make sure that there are resources and supports that are responsive to tenant needs. So wondering what supports are needed still underneath the PSH umbrella, or even a supportive housing umbrella, and what the experience is as operators for how where have tenants not been able to achieve housing stability, and potentially are there improvements to our initiative program to support not only the upfront housing development, but the ongoing success to support and retain tenants. We have made deliberate efforts, again, to align with our homelessness system. So the use of HMIS system for tracking tenant outcomes, understanding how that is working, as well as how you all think we should be measuring success within those systems. Next slide. And then we, as I said, we use and defer to local coordinated entry policies and practices to be able to do our tenant referrals into PSH units. So wanting to understand that experience. And then also thinking about if there was a broader look at where are other needs for permanent supportive housing or supportive housing investments to meet the needs that you're seeing in community. And more broadly, wanting to understand what's missing from our systems and what are the opportunities for us as the state to be partners or to work to move efforts intentionally forward to address housing needs and support those experiencing chronic homelessness. I think overall, I think that's the overview of all of those pieces, and I think we can go to the next slide.
Great, thanks, Natasha. I'm just putting in the chat that room 1 is preservation and portfolio stabilization, and then 2 is permanent supportive housing. So Sarah's going to send us into those rooms, select the room that makes the most sense for you, and then we will come back together in about 40 minutes, around 2:15. Hi, everyone. I think we're coming back together. Let's give it a few seconds to get everybody back in this room. And then we'll have Rick and Natasha give us some highlights from our conversations in our breakout sessions. And go ahead, Natasha and Rick, whenever you're ready.
I'll do a short straw. I'll go first, Rick. Think about it. It was so in the preservation group, we had it was a very thoughtful discussion, flagging of challenges and needs for portfolio projects as organizations with portfolios and for projects as well. I think some really good, I guess there's a lot of things going on in operating projects. Obviously, increased operating costs are a theme, as are challenges with rent payments and what are the impacts of essentially impacts of state tenant protections in terms of the rent increase limitations at the state, but then also the more higher level scrutiny for increases above 5% for affordable portfolio as providing ongoing challenges for organizations seeking to be address their portfolio and project needs. I think part of that as well is, what is going on with rent non-payment, and overall, the stat I have in my mind from the conversation was that there's, high degree of vacancies, and there is a high degree of rent non-payment or sporadic rent payment. And so trying to say, maybe should we be studying that? I think there's a lot of connections, I think, into the supportive housing conversation around high acuity need for tenants where resident services is not sufficient for maintaining tenancy and being successful, and that the churn from organizations that have been trying to solve this along the path and having to redirect resources into their projects and their portfolio means that those, that they're continuing to face those consequences over time. And some great ideas in that retro board about what other ways of responding in terms of that would help kind of merge those, try to address both the cause but also the impact of those differences and distinctions. And need for more asset management going on, and organizations need to be able to pay themselves to do that work of their organizations. And I think the place where these system drains from projects are giving an intrinsic motivation to either need another developer fee to help cover their core costs of operating their existing portfolio, or don't have resources to get by. And so thinking about what are the different places to intervene around that. And really appreciate the conversation. There's a lot more in that retro board, and excited to be able to review it all together along with the information we'll get from the survey. I think with that, Rick, I'll hand it to you.
Thanks, Natasha. I probably won't be as eloquent as Natasha, but I'm going to do my best. We had just a great conversation, and like Natasha, just echo how appreciative we are of folks being willing to take their time and talk to us about these issues. Just kind of summarize some of the things that popped up. I think that there was some a lot of conversation about how expenses are really exceeding budgets and revenues, that despite best efforts to get those right up front, that that PSH, for the state process being somewhat new, I think some of those numbers were missed, and so the expenses, whether they be because of insurance or contracting or what have you, just really higher than people anticipated. And so there needs to be some kind of correction there. At the same time, to fill those budgets, folks are having to do things like fundraise and things like that we really should not be expecting them to do as housing providers or nonprofits. There needs to be more services in a lot of communities. I think we got a really great reminder, a couple of them really, that whatever we do has to be tenant-centered. Even when we have these conversations, the conversations really need to be around tenant needs, and how do we center them in our work, and that always needs to be part of that conversation, so that we make sure that ultimately those that we serve are the ones that are we're getting input from and are helping us design and determine how our programs are ran. We talked a little bit about you know, some of the needs within the community, that some of the services that are lacking. And you know, we talked about maybe having some sort of, there's really no standard for PSH in terms of what those services look like. And maybe there should be, maybe we need to set some sort of standards that, you know, these are kind of the minimum things that should be provided when we're talking about a PSH unit. Let's see, trauma-informed care came up a lot. And also I thought one of the things that really stuck with me was how when you have an organization that's providing PSH, and even if they go through our institute, which I think is people really think does a great job, that for that to stick, that really needs to be organizational values, and that that there needs to be a shift within the organization, not just this group that learns it. And we also talked a lot about, or some about, how the folks that we train at our institute oftentimes move on to other things. And so the folks currently doing the job are no longer there. And we need to make sure that we're, I think, constantly training folks through some sort of process to give them the tools that they need to make sure that our PSH properties are you know, being managed and run in the way that that is tenant centered. So got some love for Project Turnkey. You know, there was just a lot of great conversation. I guess I have 4 pages of notes. I don't want to go through them all with you, but I think hopefully those hit some of the big highlights. And yeah, just great conversation. Just encourage people. I know that there might have been some conversations or some topics that maybe you're not comfortable with talking with a larger group. That's why we have that survey. So please feel free to use that. All that information will be aggregated, so that will be confidential information. And yeah, we really want to hear back from you. So thank you.
Well, thanks, Rick and Natasha and everyone, for a robust conversation. As Rick mentioned, you can still provide input on the Easy Retro boards. There's links in the chat. This recording will be posted on our website along with a summary of our discussion today. And then a survey will be going out. We'll send out a technical advisory, and we'll send it also to everybody that's been signed up for this webinar. And so we just thank you for your time and your input. The survey is going to be open until May 24th. So it's another opportunity for you to provide some more input. With that, I think we'll wrap it up and call it a day. We'll give you about 5 minutes back in your day. And again, just really grateful for everyone's time today and this great conversation. Thanks, everyone.